So let's start with this image. This is in Bushkill Falls in Pennsylvania. This is one of our favorite stops when we do our waterfall fall foliage workshops. And if you look at the histogram, it's as good as it could be. What was exposed for? Obviously, the water had to be protected. And if you come up to the histogram up here, you can see that the highlight warning light here is not on, which means there are no pure whites. Even down here, which kind of looks like it. Let's come in here. You can see, oh, we got some 99 ones, which is pretty darn close. But for it to be clipped, it's got to go to 99.9, and then that means it's gone. As far as pure blacks, there's a little highlight, little shadow warning here, and it's inconsequential. In fact, you can see it down underneath the leaves on these plants, so not a concern. But the image is very flat, as always when we're dealing with raw files. So let's do the quick fixes. I'll open up the shadows down on the bottom, bring the highlights down, and we'll add some saturation. And it's looking better, but it needs more. We can add a little vibrance. We'd have to do a bunch of light painting to fix the other problems. You can see the water's maybe gone a little bit too gray. We could bring the highlights up a little bit. It's still not really working, because what's happened is we've got two color temperatures here. We've got the sunlight hitting the foliage that's changing up here, and the falls in shadow. The falls should not be that neutral in shadow. There should be a little bit of a blue to it. So we're going to send this into Photoshop to fix this. And in fact, to really speed things up, at least to get things started quickly, I already opened this in Photoshop. So it's Command E. Whoops. All right, so here's our image in Photoshop. Again, always Command J. Let's make a copy of that background. So the saturation is down, but we're going to deal with it individually rather than globally. And the first thing I notice is all of these leaves don't have any life to them. They're changing color, but there's no life to them. So we're going to use a different tool to select that. We're going to go to Select Color Range. So the way color range works is you have these eyedroppers. So I'm going to get the eyedropper and click on the yellow leaves. And you see, well, I didn't get very much. So then you have the fuzziness slider, which expands its reach. So I'm going to come out here. It's still not enough because it just picked up that one particular yellow. So I'm going to get the plus dropper, and I'm going to click, and I'm literally just going to drag around it. Oh, I got maybe a little too much. So I'm going to back off on the fuzziness. And you can see now with that, other than the falls, we pretty much got everything else we wanted. In fact, I could even decide, well, gee, I see down in here it picked up. I don't want that. I don't want these rocks. I don't want the rocks up here. Okay, so there is our foliage. So let's hit OK. And there it is. So while this is selected, without even letting it go, I'm going to come down to our half circle and go to Use Saturation. And now if you take a look at Use Saturation, it already has a mask with it. And if we hold down the Alt or Option key and click on the mask, you get to see there it is. It just took what we had selected and automatically applied it to the mask so that only the foliage is going to get these changes. So let's add a bunch of saturation to that. Well, that looks a heck of a lot better. And also even the color, this is looking a little lemon yellow. I think I maybe want to make it a little bit warmer, a little bit more orange. So if we take the hue slider and push it over to the left, just a smidge, it just went -6 points. Notice how it has made the leaves more golden. And already look at the difference in the foliage. I can close this box. Look at the difference in the foliage just by doing that, and nothing else was affected. Even the green rhododendrons in the front, not affected. So now we have the waterfall to deal with. So we could go ahead and do that again, or we could just use something like the magic wand. So let's click on our layer 1, get the magic wand, which is just W. And up on the top, we've got anti-alias, that's fine. Contiguous, we do not want. And sample all layers, well, there's only one layer, it's the same thing. So I click on there, and that gives us the majority of it. Hold down the shift key. We'll get the little grayer parts and then these brighter parts. Oh, and there's that one little bright spot. Now, did it select some highlighty areas outside of the water? Yes, it did, and that's okay. Get a lasso. Hold down the Alt key. Look at that nice big minus we have with our nice big cursor. I apologize for not coming up with that earlier. Now I'm just going to draw all the way around to deselect that. And actually the operation we're going to do isn't going to matter if there's a little bit of outliers. Also, there's some spots in the middle that are missed. So I'm going to hold down the shift key, which turns our lasso to a plus. And let's go ahead and get these pieces in the middle that kind of got missed. And maybe up here as well, there's probably a little water. I doubt that's pure rock up there. So let's do that. All right, so again, we have our selection active. Let's one more time go to the same adjustment layer, use saturation. And once again, now we have a new mask. So if we hold down Alt and look at our mask, there's the mask for just the water. So what's the problem? Well, we might want to brighten it up a little bit. But again, the water is in shadow, surrounded by all this. It shouldn't be a purely neutral gray like it's presenting right now. It needs to be bluer. So let's take the hue slider and this time push it over to the right. And you can see you can go crazy with it. Actually, it's making it purple, and that's making it green. Where do we need to go? Just a little bit cooler, right around there. Let's increase the saturation too, because it's a very desaturated thing. And just enough to add a little bit of blue to it. And we might want to make a little bit more blue. We'll do that in a second. But let's see where we've gotten just by turning this on and off. And let me zoom in so you can see it better. Let's zoom in on the water. And it's a very subtle change. I think we might want to make it even a little bit bluer. So let's do a color balance adjustment. Let's go to here and click on color balance. Now I just want it to affect the water, but we don't have a mask for it. So you see here's the color balance layer. Well, we're going to borrow the mask we just had on use saturation. So hold down Alt. Alt or Option is the magic key of all things Adobe. Click on the mask from use saturation and just drag it up to the color balance layer, and there we go. So we start with the midtones, and we'll just drag the cyan magenta slider back and forth, and we go back and forth, and no, we don't want a red falls. I want a little bit of cyan. Green, red, probably don't want to mess with. That one's fine as is, we'll leave it alone. But the blue, the yellow, we already know we're going to go blue. And this is to taste. This is, you subjectively what looks good to you. But I'm going to add about that much blue. Now let's do the same thing for highlights. Probably a little cyan. Actually, strangely enough, I think the highlights need a little bit of red. Wouldn't have thought that. Magenta green, probably nothing. Magenta green slider is one that you could, in many cases, leave off. It depends on how bad the color shift is. And then yellow, blue. There's something to be said for adding a little yellow to the highlights if the sun is hitting it. So let's do that. Let's just add a little bit of yellow because we're going to counteract that by putting some blue in the shadows. So let's go to shadows now. We'll add some cyan. I'm going to cut to the chase and go right to blue. I'm not going to even bother with the magenta green. All right, so let's close that. And now let's turn this on and off and take a look. And now you can see it's completely lost that any neutral feel. And now we've got a little bit of blue to it. Let's go back to full screen. And now we'll turn that on and off. And notice how putting that blue in makes it feel more like water. Now I think what's left is possibly some light painting. However, one other thing I want to do, some of these rock highlights are really bright because they're getting hit directly by the sun. So I'm not sure if it should be a magic wand or it should be a color range, but let's try the magic wand. So I'm going to click on the magic wand. There's a lot of people that hate the magic wand. I don't know why. So let's click on this let's go back to our layer 1 first. Let's click on this really bright bit of rock and hit Command 0 to see what it picked up. And you know what? I can live with that. There's some weird stuff over here, but what we're going to do is, again, not going to affect it. So what we're going to do this time is a levels adjustment. Oh, it is in the falls. I don't want it to be in the falls. So lasso again, Alt for minus. Let's get that out of the falls. I don't want to affect that. Although for what we're doing, it wouldn't hurt it either. All right, so with our selection active, this time we're going to go to a levels adjustment layer. And we're going to adjust the output levels, not the main levels. We're going to bring the output levels down. Oh, I'd say a little more than we need, maybe. 205 looks good. And again, let's zoom into those rocks. And if we turn this on and off, notice the difference in those rocks. Now, that was more than we needed. I wanted a little bit more, and you can see here on the water that did not work. We'll get rid of that. But let's bring the opacity down to something where they're bright, but they're not approaching white. And let's see how that looks. That looks better. And there's a little bit here in the water that I do not like. So we just select our mask, get a brush, make it smaller, but I'm going to make it at 100%. So I just hit 0. And I'm just going to paint over that spot here. We're just painting on the mask. As long as the mask has those little frame edges around it, that's where we're painting. Let's see if there's anywhere else down here that's offending. Right here, let's get rid of that. And let's look at the top. Nope, the rest of it is just some branches. Yeah, that looks good. So Command 0 to go back to our full. Now the bottom is a little bit dark. So let's do some burning and dodging. I know we talked about just the using the burn and dodge tools. Again, I prefer doing this and setting it as an overlay. So let's hit D to make our colors black and white. And I want to paint with white. I want to brighten up a little bit. So I hit X to put white in the foreground. Control Option, and I'm going to give myself a nice big brush, and I'm just going to paint at 10%. So I hit 1 on my keyboard. Notice opacity now says 10. And I'm just going to paint on here a little bit, maybe 20%. Let's brighten it up a little faster, just to bring this area up, and make it a little smaller brush, maybe in here as well. We'll get some of these deep shadows, maybe up there. And that looks pretty good. And then one last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to go back to 1 for 10%. And I'm going to lighten up the top of the falls a little bit, because that's where I want the eyes to go. The rest of the falls falling down is fine. Let's just brighten that up a little bit. So again, does it look like I did anything? Maybe not. Ooh, you know what? I'm going to brighten up this orange here as well. Let's add some life to these fall colors. If you guys have never been here, this is a beautiful place. It's part of the Delaware Water Gap. So if I turn this on and off, look at the difference with our burning and dodging, or really it's light painting, before and after. And then lastly, let's do a sharpening like we did the other night with that shot from Bryce Canyon. So I'm going to go up to our top layer, click on the layer menu, the 3 lines, and I'm going to hold down the Alt key. Unfortunately, nothing happens. When you hold down the Alt key, there's no indication you're holding it down. But if you don't, you lose everything. You just end up with a flattened image. Alt Merge Visible gives us our flattened version of the image. And again, the reason for this is I can sharpen the entire thing and then pull that sharpness out of the waterfall, because I don't want to sharpen blurred moving water. So let's come up to sharpen. Again, my go-to for landscape photography is Smart Sharpen. And here we go. All right, I don't necessarily want to see the water. So if I come out of here, you see I get a little square, and I'll just come up into a little bit of the brush. And if you hold down, if you click on it and hold, it shows you the before and after. So you can move around and see the differences before and after. And this one needs some extra sharpening. And there's no noise here. So I'm going to bring the reduced noise down. And that looks good. So we'll hit OK. Let it do its smart sharpen. And then the last thing we're going to need to do to this is to take the sharpening off of the water. But we've already got a mask that did that on both the color balance and hue saturation adjustment layers. So we're just going to steal it from there, but we have to invert it because we want the opposite. So almost done. Okay, nice and sharp. You can zoom in a bit and see. It's just, look at that. It's just a beautiful crispness when we look at that image there. But again, we don't want to sharpen here. I'm not seeing a lot of effects of the sharpening, but we want to get rid of it anyway. And this layer is just about sharpening. So here is our mask, or one of our masks from the waterfall itself. Hold down Alt. I'm going to drag it up to add it to the sharpening layer. Now I'm sharpening just the waterfall. And we don't want that. You can see we've already lost the crispness in here. Just click on the mask, and the command is Command or Control I, which means invert. And it reverses it. Now it is sharpening here and not the waterfall. In fact, you can Alt click on it and you'll see that's the black part is the area that's being protected from the sharpening. And Command 0, and let's take a look at it full screen. And we ended up with a really lovely shot. So let's hit Command S on this. And you can see down the bottom, it's saving it. And then we'll be able to compare from where we started to where we ended up. That's one thing I do really like about Lightroom, to be able to compare where I started and where I ended up. So here's our original. There's what we really started with. So let's hit C to compare. Shift tab to get rid of the menus, LL to turn the lights off, and look at the difference. It's really quite remarkable. And it turned something that was a nice composition into an image that's really beautiful. All right, lights back on, Shift tab and C to get back. And yeah, oh, again, there's where we ended up. Actually, that's where we ended up. Okay. And just a lovely shot. It's just screaming to be printed. Oh, while we're here, let's talk about that. Let's talk about printing. I could spend hours just on printing, but what I wanted to talk about is just resolution. How big a print can I make out of this? So if I hit I, that will show me the dimensions of this image. And I see that this was shot in 2018. And let's see, 4x6, 12. This is this is the Sony A7R2, would have been back in 2018. But this resolution, what does this mean? How big a print can I make out of this? And how much? What resolution do you guys think is necessary for this? Who thinks 300 DPI? Anybody? No? 240? Okay, we got a couple of 240s. Another number higher. Anybody higher than 300? No? All right, 180, 150. All right, Bob says 180, 150, 125. Okay, well, the answer might surprise you. Some of you have heard me talk about this before. The real answer is about 180. And even 180 is extra safe. Why do I say that? Because it has to do with the resolution of the human eye. If you are 4 years old, and no, there are not many 4-year-olds with this much gray hair in this crowd, and you have perfect eyesight, unaided, it's perfect, and you can look at something from 4 inches away, you can resolve about 360 dots per inch from 4 inches away. How many of you can even focus on something 4 inches away at this point? Not me. So what is the normal viewing distance of, a 12 or 16 by 20, which everybody that's ever done a print comp, 16 by 20. How far away do you look at a 16 by 20? Well, in order to see the whole thing, you're at about, 18 inches away? Is that fair? 18 to 20 inches is where you're going to view that. Well, what happens to your eyesight is at 18 to 20 inches away, your acuity drops from 360 to 180. And as you get away further, it drops even lower. For example, any of you guys, I'm sure you've had canvas prints done. Yes. Canvas prints, without even telling you, canvas prints are printed at 150 dots per inch. And the reason that is the canvas material causes so much interaction with the light and the subject matter that you can't see it. And honestly, depending on the image, most people find it impossible to distinguish anything above 125 dots per inch. At 100, you can start to see some loss of detail, but from 125 up, you really can't. And when I do printing workshops, I have a series of prints that I always put out, and I know which one's which. They're labeled A, B, C, D, or whatever. And I'll ask everybody, I have a form, tell me which print has the highest resolution and which one's the lowest. No one ever comes close. Most people can, it's random. They can't tell the difference between 125 up. And that's even printed on like a luster stock, much smoother paper. So you don't need as much resolution as you think. So if you look at these pixel numbers up here, this 4160 by 6240, well, what does that mean? Well, I just get out the calculator, and 180 is a good number because you can play it safe. You can enlarge from there and you have plenty of room. So if I say 6240 and just divide that by 180, that brings me a number 34 2/3. So say 35, really 36-inch print from this without even stretching the possibility. If I was going to a canvas, I really could take this to 125. If I divide by 125, that means I could make this a 50-inch print on a canvas and it wouldn't look any different than a 300 DPI print. There are a lot of labs that are actually acknowledging this. There are some now that will say, particularly Nations Photo Lab in around the DC area, they actually have it on their website that you need to have your file at least be 125. So anyway, I digress. Let's move on. All right, so here we are. This is sunset in Zion National Park. This is a formation called the Watchman. And I exposed for the sky because the sky was absolutely spectacular. And what happened to the foreground? Well, obvious. Did it look this dark to my eyes? Not even close. It looked great. Yes, it was in shadow, but it looked great. Our cameras it's a combination of the cameras and the software. Our cameras are relatively flat when it's brought in, but the raw converters add a contrast curve by default. No way to not have it happen. And this is the result. So you would think there's nothing down here. Look, as I bring the magnifier over, look underneath the histogram and look at the numbers. 1, 1, 0.8. That's all the data that's in there. And you'd think, well, that's hopeless. And you'd be wrong. So let's go ahead and do some basic fixes here in Lightroom because, face it, there are things in Lightroom and in Adobe Camera Raw that are better than what Photoshop is going to make you do after the fact. So particularly selecting sky, well, selecting skies doesn't matter, but selecting the foreground is really handy. But let's go ahead and select the sky. And we're going to just add some more life back to it. It needs a little bit more contrast. The saturation is falling down a bit. So there's our sky. It picked a little bit of the far distance here. And for what we're going to do, that's actually okay. So let's add saturation because this was like almost kind of a peach color in the clouds here. The blue is off a little bit, but we're going to have to fix that separately. I'm going to add a little dehaze to darken the clouds. Now, doesn't that look better? As I mentioned, however, though, the blue is off. It's got a little too cyan for my liking. So use saturation luminance. Let's get on the hue here. Click on the tool, and I'm going to click and push up. I'm going to go for about 12. kind of my go-to number on that. That looks great. We're done with the sky. Sky looks great. Now let's go and create a new mask, and we're going to select the sky again. Except this time we're going to invert that. So if you go to where the sky is, you get to see the little 3 dots here, and you click on invert. And there's our foreground. So let's see what we can do with the foreground. Let's bring the exposure way up. And look, there's all kinds of stuff here. It's there. Is it going to have some noise in it? Yeah, it's gonna, but that's okay. How many of you still do HDR? Anybody? Yeah, I gave up on HDR because I've found that even when I tried shooting things like this in HDR, that when I composited them together, they never looked good as my best single exposure that I then reworked in something like here. So, all right, the exposure looks great. Let's bring up the shadows even a little. Look, you get to really see how much details there. I don't want to bring it up that much, but I'm going to bring the exposure down. And I'm going to try to just in my mind's eye, remember what this scene looked like. So let me reset. So I have a copy, a virgin copy that we can go back to. And there's an insider joke right there because this is the Virgin River, if you've ever been to Zion. So what do I like about the foreground? Well, it's desaturated, but actually that's okay. It's in shadow, but it's maybe a little too desaturated. When the light levels get very low, the saturation gets very flat. So let's bring some of that back. And I'm going to cut to the chase also with hue saturation luminance. And I'm going to add some green. And again, we still have, there we go, just to add a little bit of life back these trees. But I don't necessarily want the foreground any brighter than that. In fact, I'm going to end up darkening it. What I want to focus on now is what's going on here. So let's get a brush K, auto mask is on, and let's go ahead. And I'm just going to get these bright areas, actually even not just the bright areas. I'm going to get the entire formation up here because I just want to put some life back into it. In fact, you can even see the sun hitting up there. And let's add a bunch of saturation into that. But the shadows got a little too dark, or too light rather. Let's do some clarity and let's add some dehaze. Let's bring some of the black back into those mountainsides. In fact, I'm going to even make the blacks a little darker. And all right, so we're in a good starting point, but we have some compositional issues here as well. Now, one of the problems is, gee, there's too much sky and there's maybe not enough base, or just the base perspective. Actually, maybe there's too much base. The problem is, if you've ever been here, this photograph, this viewpoint is from a bridge. So there's really no way to get down lower to change the perspective, what you'd really like to have. And if you went down underneath the bridge, which you can do, you'd have to stand in the middle of the river, but then all of these trees would be in between you and the mountains. So it's just not possible, but Photoshop can fix this for us. So Command E, I'll send this into Photoshop. Also, this kind of piece over here on the right is maybe a bit too massive. The foreground, actually the very foreground right at our feet here, is a little too bright, but it looks good in the mid-range right in here. So that's what we're going to have to work with. Things got really faded as it went off to this distant here. I'm okay with that because that's really what would happen. All right, so here's our image coming into Photoshop. Let that finish drawing. Okay, so Command J, let's make ourselves a copy. All right, so what are the issues? Like I talked about, the bottom is probably too bright. As much as I love the sky, and this is a really spectacular sky, it's too tall because we want to add some weight to the Watchman and the other peaks here. So let's get our marquee tool and click and drag, and I'm going to come right down to the tip of the Watchman, and we're going to use content aware scale here. Hold down the shift key, go to the middle point here and pull it down. So we get to keep all our clouds, but we get to make the distance from the tip of the mountain up to where the clouds end much closer together. So let's see how that looks. And we'll deselect that. Now, in fact, I can hide our original background layer to see. Now, I'd also mentioned that I thought maybe the bottom was a little too big as well. Actually, as I'm looking at it, it looks pretty good. I think maybe there's a little too strong bit of the river here. So let's get a marquee again. Select the bottom, hit content aware scale again. Excuse me. And hold down shift. And I just want to bring that up a little bit. I just want to compress that a smidge and hit enter on there. And we'll deselect that. And I might even I might just crop off the top, but let's get rid of the other stuff we don't need. So just command or control click on the icon of the layer 1. It selects everything that's on there, and then image crop, rather than have to bother with the crop tool. And there we go. You see it starting to come together? You see how it's starting to look more compositionally that it works? Now, I mentioned, as much as I hate getting rid of any of these clouds here, this thing over here has gotten a little too big. So let's bring up the crop tool. Let's just see what we're going to need to do. So we'll bring that over. And how far do we want to come? Well, this is subjective. I'm thinking, that puts it right in the middle, which I don't love. I think I'm going to bring in from the left, bring in from this edge a little bit as well. Let's come into about there. I think that's working. I'm going to take a little off the top. Now I'll bring a little bit back to the right, and let's crop there. Let's see how that looks. That's working for me. So again, what else is going on? Well, the river is a little too bright. So let's get our magic wand and let's select the river. Oh, and that didn't work, did it? Why? Well, look, we've got 32 for our selection, and contiguous wasn't on. So I think I really need contiguous here. And let's turn this down to about 20. Now let's select in there. That's better. And to add to it, just hold the shift key and click on the other little spots. Yeah, we got a little sand there. Whoops, that was too much. We got some sand there, but the sand is too bright too. In fact, I'm probably going to add to this. In fact, let's do that. Because this rocks and dirt. Oops, too much again. These rocks and dirt are adding a little much. We'll do them. We'll deal with them separately. So let's bring down the brightness of this. How do we bring brightness down? Well, brightness, contrast, levels, or curves. I think this is one is simple, so we'll just make this a levels adjustment. So we bring levels up. Again, we had it selected already, so we've already got a mask masking out that area. And if I want to darken this, I click on this center and I push it off to the right, and you can see that will darken there. I don't want to make it dark. I just want to take some of the brightness, the super brightness away from it so that it doesn't become a focal point. The rest we can adjust with doing some burning and dodging. So let's do that. Let's create a blank layer. I'm not going to bother with filling it with gray. It's not going to be necessary on this. So let's get a brush, and I'm going to put black in the foreground. I'm going to paint with black, and I'm just going to work at 10% where we left off. I just want to get this very bottom area here. Oh, it's on normal. Forgot to change it to overlay. Just going to work in here a bit. And over in here, black at 10% isn't cutting it. So let's do 20%. So we'll do 20. Yeah, 20 is what it needed because it was already kind of dark. So with 20%, I'm just doing the very bottom. I'm even going to do into the river a little bit more. That was too much. I'm going to do over in here a little bit along these edges. Again, what this is doing is it's forming a subliminal visual block to keep you from leaving the image. And even this tree here, this leafless cottonwood, I want you to see that it's there, but I don't want it to be focused on. And this trail here is a little bit too dark as well. Let's bring that down, or a little too light rather. We'll bring that down. And while we're at it, I want to follow the light and dark areas on the actual image. So this area is dark. Let's darken there. This area is dark at the base of the peak and up through here. And then again on this offending hill coming up the other side. That was a little too much. Now let's get white. So we hit X. I'm going to go back to 10% because I want to open up these light areas. So I just start painting over top the areas that are light to bring them back. In fact, there's a little ridge right here. I'm going to go to 20% to bring that one up. There we go. Follow along that distant valley there. And sometimes you can just start overworking an image and you just really need to step back and decide, is there anything else you need to do? I might want to fine tune the crop a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit of brightness into the tops of some of these pines. It's just about that much. And let's turn off our overlay layer to see what it is we've done, because you kind of lose track of it. And look at the difference. There's what we started with. And look at the difference when we do that, how your focus changes here. Now, as I'm looking at it, I think it's a little too sharp. We need to blur it. So let's go up to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And how much do we need? Well, we'll add a whole bunch, which is a little too much. I think about 20 pixels or so is going to be the answer. Now 37, that actually works. Now we turn it off and you can see it's blended together a little bit better. And let's look at it bigger. So I'm going to hit Command 0 and hit F so that we can see the whole image. And you take a look here to see, all right, are there any places that it doesn't work what we just did? And I'm happy with it. So F and Command S to save it. And let's take one look back in Lightroom and see what it is we want to do to just add a little bit of further stuff. Notice I did not sharpen in Lightroom. There's a reason for it, because I think this particular image, because of the shapes of the rocks, rather than sharpening, because it's not really fine details, it's big wedges of things, I think it needs more of a clarity, because clarity does make things kind of sharp, boxy looking. So again, I mentioned the crop. Let's bring up the crop. Let's hit R. I do think maybe I want a little less on the right, little off the top, and maybe even a little off the bottom. And as I do that, you know what? I want even less. Typically, you don't want to have your subject in the middle, but because of this thing over here and this thing over here, I think it actually works. Let's see. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that because we have our leading line from the river leading us up to here. And we might play with that a little bit too. So let's add our vignette before we go any further, because that's going to influence how we do any more light painting. I'm going to do a 12. And this area in here, just this, since that's the focus, needs more light. And we're going to do that with a radial filter. So Shift M. And I'm going to do a long, thin one and have it follow the ridge line up to there. And let's bring up the exposure. And we're going to add some clarity, maybe even a little dehaze to add some blacks back into it. And I don't like what it did here, so I'm just going to subtract a little bit from it. So we'll get a brush and I'm going to subtract. In fact, if I hit the O key, you get to see what happens. Just going to subtract it from these spots because I want this shadow kind of, again, acting as a secondary pedestal to the mountaintop. In fact, I'm going to take it out of here. Some of these dark spots, I'm going to take it out. You can see there's little dark spots on the peak itself. Let's let them stay dark. And in there. All right. So you can see that's what we just did, but we added enough light to that. And I think I'm done playing with it. I don't think it needs anything else. Here's where we started. That's the raw file we started with. Excuse me. And you can see it has potential because of its composition and the incredible sky, but obviously there are issues, and we took it to here. Are there more things I would do to it? Maybe. I might even darken the foreground up a little bit more or not. The image works pretty well for me. And is there anything you guys would think you would do to this?
There we go.
Okay.
I like the leading line of the river, and when you darken it, I would actually, from my perspective, would bring it up a little bit to lead you in.
Yeah, I've thought about that, and I've done this edit before, and the danger of it is if I were to brighten this further, it becomes something that draws your eye, and I want the eyes to go here. Whether you like it or not, you are being led up this river. It's a little more subliminal without us making it brighter, but just to prove that, let's go ahead and do it. I'm going to get a brush, and I'm going to turn off auto mask, and let's do a brush in here and create a path that goes up to the peak. So if we do something like this and then bring up the exposure, just bringing up a little bit, see what happens? See how the brightness of the river starts to compete with the mountain.
Got it.
That's the danger of that. So and your thought process is correct, but in this case, in this particular image, this thing isn't big enough in the frame, so it needs all the help it can get. I don't necessarily want to crop it anymore because it's partly about the sky, but by lightening this up here, it ends up competing. So I'm actually going to go in and delete that mask. And you see, now when it's gone, you can see, you know what, this is still plenty light, but it's not competing with the peak. Oh, by the way, I know you want to see it. You ready? There it is. Come on, tell me you don't want that in a giant print hanging over your sofa. You know you do. I had so much fun with that. But you can see, don't the reflections look real in there with our blurring and all? So yeah, I even made sure each of the bananas had slightly different marks on them. So, and I kept some that were similar to show the parentage of Junior is the offspring of these two. That was my thought process. My wife's shaking her head. She thinks he's lost his mind. Okay, wanted to share that with you. All right, we were playing with this the other night, this image of Nauset Light. I really like the reflection, but the reflection's too far away from the lighthouse. We've already done all the basic adjustments. If you look up in here, the highlights were brought down, the shadows up, etc. The sky needs some life. This is one sky that could really benefit from the Nick filters from Viveza, so we will end up there. But what are the other problems? Well, the lighthouse is skewed. You notice that? How we experienced this before. The lighthouse is leaning to the left a little bit. The top walkway is not level. So this needs Photoshop help. So we've done all the basics already. It's time to send it into Photoshop. So let's Command E that over. So I'm going to tab over to Photoshop because I think our other image is still open there. And we'll let it come in. All right, so let's get rid of the other images we're not using anymore. We can get rid of Zion and the waterfall and the waterfall. No, that was my original. Okay, again, what do we do first? Command J, make a copy of that. What is the first offending problem besides this spacing? And I think, strangely enough, the lighthouse reflection looks straight, doesn't it? Isn't that kind of weird? Why the lighthouse itself is leaning. So let's deal with that first. The building next to it, you really can't tell, but this lighthouse is definitely leaning. So let's draw around the lighthouse. I'm going to get some of the building and we will copy paste, Command C, Command V. So we have that on its own layer. So let's zoom in up there. And as we get closer, you can really see how much the thing is leaning in. So let's go to Edit, Transform, Warp. And we got a problem. So let's just click on the lighthouse and start dragging it to the right. But if we do that, we get a worse problem. So that's not the answer. We need to bring these points in this way. And we're going to need to do some tugging and pulling all over the thing. In fact, we're going to need to come down here as well. And then we need to bring it down on the top. We're going to actually probably end up bringing it, the whole thing up when we're done. And this isn't quite vertical yet. So let's bring in the top a little bit. That's actually not looking terrible. Let's hit OK on that. We'll hit return. Let's turn that on and off. And yeah, that's looking pretty good. But to double check, let's hit Command R to bring up our rulers and grab a ruler from the left side so we can put it right through the lightning rod there, through the middle of the lighthouse tower. And is that straight enough? It's good, but this line from here to here isn't level, nor is that. So we need to fix the bottom. So let's go back to Warp. And in fact, to help me along, I'm going to put some guidelines right there, which is really showing how these lines should be lining up, but they're not. I mean, maybe the thing is slightly leaning, I don't know, but we need to fix that. So I'm going to click and drag down. And actually that one pretty much did it. Bring the bottom down a little bit. Yep. Doesn't that look better? Now, while we're at it, lighthouse, Nauset Light is a fairly squat lighthouse, so I'm not going to, I could make it taller, but I'm not going to. Let's get rid of our guides, go to View, Clear Guides, and then Command R to get to the ruler. But what are the problems that we ran into? We've got some breaks to deal with. And you can see here right on the building. Look at that right there is a problem. We've got some breaks in the clouds. And same thing on the other side. And some breaks in the foliage. Now, this is at 200%. So you're not going to notice it this badly, but still. So the easiest way, again, to do this is to isolate it. Look just at the lighthouse. I'm sorry, let's zoom back in. And let's create a mask and get started with a brush. I'll make it somewhat smaller, and I'm going to work it, oh, this is heavier, 70%. So let's do 70% along the edges. Now, the one place we're not going to be able to do this to is where the building is. That's going to have to be an all or nothing. Because if not, other than that, it would be a serious amount of editing. So what we're going to do is get the lasso tool. And I'm going to hold down the Alt key and draw a straight line right down the lighthouse, cut across the foliage and up and right to there. And we're going to delete that. And rather than delete it, I'm actually just going to hit Option Delete, which will fill this area with black since we have a mask we're dealing with. I just need to make it 100%. And there, that's, so we just completely got rid of the roof because that will allow the old roof to come in as it was. And let's take a look and see how it works now. That was why it was important to do that. All right. So now we have you can see how off it was. It really was. I'm seeing some breaks in the foliage a little bit. Let's go ahead and fix that. Let's zoom in a little bit. And yeah, I'm seeing it right here a little more. So let's get a brush again. What are we at? 70% should be good. And I'm going to go over that. And there's some stuff going on in here, but as I'm looking at it, you really can't even see it. Actually, we're going to go to 100% right through here. Let's just fix that once and for all. Yeah, there we go. mean, is there a break technically here? Yes, but it's weeds. They all look the same. All right, I think that fixed it. I'm looking at the clouds. Up here a little bit needs a little work. So let's get rid of that. Anywhere else? You just let the lighthouse dance back and forth a little bit, and then you'll see if there are any things that you notice. Okay, so I'm happy with that. Now we got to put it together. There's no reason for me to keep this on its own layer anymore. So we've got these two layers visible. So I'm just going to click on merge visible. Don't need to worry about stacking this right now. So now we'll take our new lighthouse shape and merge it with the layer one. So let's zoom out on this a little bit. What did I say the problems were? All right, love the reflection. It's too far away from the lighthouse. There's just too much street here. There's also a lot more in this image than we need. That's easy, but I want to keep this reflection. So here's what we're going to do. We need the rulers again, because we need to draw a line, figure just below, just where the road starts, below the fence. And then we're going to use the marquee tool. And under view, you want to make sure that you have snap turned on, and it should be snap to guides, because this allows me to just come right by that line and it will automatically snap to it. Now I want to compress the top. I want to leave this alone. So I go to edit content aware scale again, hold down the shift key, and we're going to squish this thing. And I'm not even happy with how much that's done. I think we're going to have to do it twice. So I'm going to hit enter on that. And I'm going to take just the piece that goes down to where the lighthouse starts and do it again. Edit content aware scale, shift key, and there we go. Then I get to just compress the road so we can make the road narrower and still get to use our really cool reflection. So now I can just add, hold down shift and add to the bottom. And since we have this line here and we have snap on, we can now click our move tool, which is this one. If you want to make sure it goes straight, hold down the shift key. That makes it vertical or horizontal. Click and drag up. And when it gets near the line, it snaps into place. And I can deselect that. And let's get rid of our guides again. We're done with those. Great. Cropping wise, what does it need? All right, a little less headroom over the lighthouse, just a little bit. We certainly don't need that much on the left. However, notice there's a downward path coming from these trees downward to the building. This downward slope leads you into the image. So that's good, but I want to maintain some of it. So I'm going to come right to here and let this be the beginning of our slope coming down, which leads you. Now on the right-hand side, we have this big bush here, but once you get over it, there's nothing stopping you from leaving. So I'm going to come into here to make sure. And as I'm looking at this, gee, this is looking like it might be best as something close to a square image. We have more on the bottom that we need. Let's see. Actually, that's looking, I hate to say it, because you guys know I really dislike them. That's looking an awful lot like an 8x10. So before I do crop though, I'm going to put it back. Because the same thing when we're out in the field, for those of you guys who have been with me on field workshops, that's fine if that's where you want to be. But after you've got your final crop, you think in the camera, back off on your zoom or step back a little bit, because remember, you can always crop, but you can't uncrop if you didn't capture it in the first place. So we'll hit enter on that. Yeah, there's a little bit of blank there. That's okay. Let's send this into Viveza, because this sky is one of those skies that's really going to benefit from it. So we'll go to filter, Nick collection, Viveza. I did just download the latest, the new upgrade, the version 4, but I didn't want to start with that in case there was something new in there I wasn't familiar with. So we'll get that. I am doing a webinar for DxO and a lab called Digital Silver Imaging on black and white conversions and using silver effects. I'll let you know. I think it's going to be first week of May. All right, so I'm going to take our half and half split, move this over to the left. And just cut to the chase. Let's add some structure. And just doing that, look at the clouds. Look what it does to that sky. That is great. But I want more, more. Do I need to do anything else the rest of the image? No. Globally, it looks fine. Let's do some more to the sky. So we're going to get a control point and put it up in the clouds here. I need to scroll down because I'm going to add structure just to that white in the clouds. And I'm going to increase the brightness because I want the whites to be brighter. Yeah, something like that. And I'm going to extend the reach of this filter. Look what it's done to these fine clouds up here. It's beautiful. As I'm looking at it, and you tell me if you see it on Zoom, to my eye, these clouds look a little bit too blue. It looks like they should be a little more neutral. It's a fine thing. I'm just going to add a little bit of warmth to them, which will count. See, if I go blue, or if I go that way, that's too much. But if I go here, they just get weird blue. I think just a couple of points going to warm will neutralize this color and make it look more natural. So I like this filter. I like what it's done. I'm going to hold down the Alt key, click, and I'm going to drag it over to these and look what happens here. By the way, did you see what happened when I went over the lighthouse? You might decide you like that effect. I might also. And then I'm going to hold down Alt again and come over to here. Now let's do our before and after and look at the sky now. Look at the difference. Here's something else cool. If you hold down the Shift key and click on these, you can now adjust them globally. Once you have them, you can actually group them together. Once you do that, if you make a change on one, it affects all of them. So if I come down here and decide I'm going to bring down the brightness on one, it brings it down on all of them. And boy, you know, it was an accident. I wasn't really thinking about it, but gee, I kind of like that little bit of intensity on the lighthouse red as well. So what the heck, let's go ahead and add a little saturation and structure just to the top of the lighthouse. It's going to be slightly supernatural, but we're going for that Kodachrome look. I know you guys used to shoot Kodachrome. Everybody did. Not the greatest thing for landscape photography. All right. So again, if we look at before and after, that's what it looked like when we brought it in to Viveza, and there's after. Bob's asking about the reflection. Good question. But the reflection is somewhat transparent. If anything, I actually think it might be a little too saturated. I'm going to actually address that when we bring this into Lightroom. But a reflection should not match a sky unless it is a completely solid, smooth day and you're getting that perfect reflection. But it should be diminished somewhat or it doesn't look real. So keep that in mind. A reflection generally should always be darker. So let's hit apply and we'll see our Viveza effect. Now, here's another cool thing about using Viveza in Photoshop versus Lightroom. When you work in Viveza, you're on a layer. So that means you can mask out parts of it. If after you've done something, you think, oh, that's a little too much, or maybe I don't want it everywhere on the image. So let's see how this looks when this comes in. So let me get rid of the rulers and let's zoom in a little bit. And let's turn it on and off. And I like it. I actually think the effect is too strong down here on the bottom. And I think, and now that I'm looking at it, it's not that I don't like the clouds, but they've gotten so powerful that they might be starting to overpower the lighthouse. So I'm going to bring the opacity, the overall opacity of our Viveza layer down a little bit, just to take a little bit of it out. I think something like that, because it's still a big change, but now the clouds aren't really competing with the lighthouse quite as much. Also, as I said down here, this is too much. Their reflection, the way it was when we started, I think was good. So let's create a mask down here. And I'm going to do a gradient, a black gradient from the bottom up with the G key. Gradient is G. It's also right here in the toolbar. And you click on this and go to basics. And I want from foreground, or in this case, black, to transparent. That's what the checkerboard's for. And I'm going to click on here, hold down the Shift key to keep it straight and have that come up. Oh, my opacity was down. Sorry. I want that at 100%. So let's do it again. All right, so now if I alt click on there, you can see that's what I just did. I basically turned off the Viveza effect on the reflection. So now as we turn this on and off, you can see all the changes are just happening up top. Like that much better. All right, now let's just for our little finishing touches, let's send this thing into Lightroom because I'm also not sure I'm absolutely loving the color of the sky. It may have looked this way, but let's see. So Command S to send this into Lightroom. So tab over to Lightroom, and here is our image. So let's get our crop tool. We certainly don't want to have the white parts on the bottom. I'm going to bring down the top a little bit. So composition wise, where do I want this? Well, as we had mentioned, I think I'm going to bring it over to here. So that's our slope. And then on the right side, I'm going to have the big bush with these branches there. And gee, is that a square or an 8x10? Let's check. Let's see what a 4x5 is. Nope, a 4x5 is actually wider. That would be a 4x5 or 8x10 or 16x20. Don't think I like it as well. I think this is a square image. So let's try 1:1. And, I think that's the answer. I think that's our crop right there. I'm going to make it a little bigger. But I think that's it. I think that works. So let's add a little bit of a vignette. I mentioned I thought this was a little too dark and too saturated. So let's create a linear gradient, which is M. I'm going to start right at the base of the lighthouse and come up here. I think it's a little dark, so I'm going to open up the shadows a bit. I think that's better. And I'm going to pull out a little saturation because it's a reflection. I don't want it competing with the lighthouse. Although I may add now, remember we did add a bunch of saturation to this red. We need to do that again. So K, turn on auto mask. We'll go ahead and select the red in the reflection of the lighthouse. And let's boost the saturation of that a little bit. Maybe add a little more magenta to it. All right. Anything else? Could we do some more light painting on this for shaping? Yeah, let's go ahead. K for our brush. We're going to turn off auto mask. Make it a little bit bigger. Let's make a bigger brush. And I'm thinking through here is a little bit too bright. Gradually fade that in. Well, you can see we've got some shadow coming in from this side. And we'll do a little bit less, a little smaller brush through the fence here. All right, let's bring the exposure of that down. There we go, just enough to take some of the heat off of it. And then lastly, Shift M for our lovely little radial to refocus on the lighthouse and the building. I'm not going to worry about the lighthouse and the reflection because that's plenty bright. Just add a little bit of light there and we're good. So I'm going to go back to our original just so you can see how far we've come. If you remember, we did this original edit back when we were just doing Lightroom. I'm going to reset it because that's what the original file looked like. Let's go to full screen. There's our original raw file, and there's our edit. Nice square image. Squares do work. Squares work very well if you have a single subject image, and this image is about one thing, and it's about the lighthouse. So if you're going to do squares like this, they can be very decorative. So you can all put these in your beach house because I know you guys all have beach houses. This is the Blarney Castle. And it's not my favorite view of it, but it presented some interesting problems, both in exposure and in perspective. And again, if you look at the histogram up here, it's as good as it could be. We do have very little bit of white clipping up in here. So we click on here, you see the little blue, which is just a warning. And even if you click on it, you don't see anything. And if you zoom in, you can see alongside some of the feathers, those little red dots, that's light white clipping. It means there's no detail there. Do we care? No, there's no detail to be seen there anyway. We could just fix that by bringing the highlights down a little bit, and notice the blue dot goes away. So that's fine. But exposure is as good as it could be. We are from the left to the right. Now we've also got a warning. Since it's not actually in color, it's only in gray, it means it's getting dangerously close. It's not 100% black. But again, look where it is. It's underneath this tree in the water. So not a worry. So let's do what Lightroom does well. Let's just bring the shadows all the way up, and look, it's all there. I'm going to bring the highlights down more to give us more wiggle room to bring up the midtones. And that quickly, we've gone to that point. And let me go ahead and, before Bob scolds me, let me make another virtual copy of that. And okay, so there's what we just started with, and just moving those 3 sliders, look where we are. So while we're at it, we can add some, we'll add some vibrance, which is the green, and we'll add some saturation, which is overall. And after we just do that, you get to see there's this bird here, which actually happens to be a statue. It's not a real bird, but as dark as this was, look at how good it looks. So the data is there, and Lightroom and Adobe Camera Raw do an amazing job at this. So the biggest problem is, well, we've got some people there. You have to decide if they have to go. And the answer is, yeah, they got to go. And we obviously have some severe distortions. Look at this one tower. And I don't think this, let's see how wide a lens this was shot with. Let's hit I, and this was 16 millimeters. So that's pretty wide. Plus, you know, whenever you have a really wide lens and you point up, things like this happen. We need to fix that, but we can do that in Photoshop. So we're in pretty good shape already. Let's send this into Photoshop, Command E. Have any of you been to the Blarney Castle before? No, it's a quite beautiful park in addition to the castle. The castle's cool too. There's so many interesting viewpoints here. Great place to visit, which we are going to do. And if you're into Irish wool, Irish linens, like sweaters and things like that, this is right across the street from the hotel we stay at, which is called the Blarney Woolen Mills Hotel, which is like a Home Depot of Irish sweaters and clothing. The place is amazing. And we always spend a fortune there and generally have stuff shipped home. Okay, so Command J. There's our duplicate. So where to start first? Well, I think I'm going to get rid of the people first. So let's zoom in on where the people are. And these are going to be pretty easy to get rid of. So we get the lasso tool. We'll just drag across this woman. And by the way, coming in close to where you want to sample is good, but you do need to leave a little bit around the edges. In fact, maybe a little more than this, because that is one of the things that the Content Aware Fill tool uses to figure out what to replace it with. So let's go to Edit Fill, or again, Shift F5, Content Aware, and hit OK, and voila, she's gone. Little bit of a distortion here that I don't like. We'll come back and fix that in a second. Let's get rid of these 2 ladies. I'll feel mildly bad about getting rid of her. Shift F5, enter. I will not feel bad about her because she's on her phone. You should be enjoying the scenery, no phones. So you're gone. And she's gone. Now that left a little of a distortion here and a little distortion here. So let's get our stamp tool, which is S. Let's get a bigger stamp. I want to be at 100%, so I hit 0. And I'm going to sample, I think right in here. Just hold down Alt and click, and then we'll come up in there. That's good. And then here we've got, there's like ferns or something growing out of the side of the wall. So let's get a little smaller brush. And let's pick this over here, and we'll bring that down here and just add to that little bit that caused a distortion. Something going on in here. So let's sample some rocks from down below, and we'll fill that in as well. And there we go. We can toggle that on and off and they're gone. Now it lost some of the texture in the rocks here as well. So I'm going to sample out here. I'm going to bring down the opacity though. I'm going to go 60%. I just want to pick up some of the texture, some of the breaks in the rock, just to add a little bit of detail in there. And there we go. So again, before, after, they're gone. So Command 0 to go back. All right, so now that they're gone, I think it's time to focus on the castle. So this is a big one. Do we do this in one fell swoop, or do we have to break it up? And my gut tells me that this is going to need to be broken up because they're going in two different directions. This has got a different problem than this one over here. So let's zoom in on that. And you can see this is a different piece, especially up here. So let's get the lasso tool. And in this part, I'm going to go just follow the castle down. And then I'm going to drag around. Oh, there's some people about to go into that. We'll cut them a break. They look nice enough. And let's get around here and let go. And we're going to copy, paste. So now we've got a layer with just that. But again, where this is going to overlay the other part of the castle, we've left alone. So what tool are we going to use? Warp, right? Yes. Edit, transform, warp. So let's see what we can do. Let's bring down there. Oh, that just does a lovely job almost all by itself. Geez, I don't even know if we're going to need to do more than that. Let's bring that down. And actually, everything else is looking pretty straight. Let's bring this out a little bit in the middle. No, right, yeah, right there. We'll bring this in a little. And that was too easy. Let's turn that on and off. Look at the difference. Now, did we make it too short by doing that? Was it really taller? Well, if you look at the inside of it right here, it actually comes up right to about this part of the crenellated top. So let's hit Command T rather than a warp. Hold down the Shift key to make it in one direction and just make it a little taller so that this now matches where it used to be. And now we have the right perspective. Now you can see the breaks in the clouds, but since we cut right alongside the castle overlay right here, that's fine. We don't need to mess with that. Really, the only problem is right in here. So we'll create a mask, get our brush. I'm going to work, I'm going to hit 90. I'm going to go 90%. Let's make the brush a little bigger. And I'm just going to paint with black over, whoops, I got too much. My brush was too big. Let's just paint over top of where I can see that break. Now let's turn it on and off like we did for our lighthouse. A little bit of a break here, but not much. Whoops, right in here a little bit. And I think that's the only one that's noticeable. Yeah, maybe in here a little bit. All right, so now we've got that part of the tower fixed. Now it's time to work on this part of the castle. So let's come back down to layer 1. We'll get a little bit of this, and the same thing. I'm going to come to the edge and hold down the Alt key to turn my lasso into a straight line so that we can move this thing and not affect other stuff. Now the bottom of the castle is probably good, but I'm just going to click and drag across. I'm going to leave some sky there. And we'll come around and we're going to copy and paste that. So copy, paste. And now we've got a layer with just that. In fact, we could even hide that. So now let's, with this part of the castle chosen, let's go to transform warp once again. So what's the problem? Well, this part is certainly too tall. So let's bring that down. Let's just grab the top and squish it down. Let's see, how much are we going to need? I see another perspective problem that we're going to fix separately. Maybe something like that. And maybe we need to bring up the left and right. Yep, that's the answer. We'll bring up the left and we'll click on this one and bring up the right. as we bring the top down. Now we are looking up at the thing. You're going to have somewhat of a perspective like this. That looks a little off center too. Let's make sure that's vertical. Let's hit enter on that and see where we are. You can see we've got some of the old tower there. But as far as perspective, look at the difference now. Now it looks more like something you'd see when you're looking up that way. And we've got some other problems. We've got something, the old castle sitting there. Should this one be taller? Let's find out. Let's do a Command T on that. Hold down the Shift key and we'll pull this up. And I think about there looks okay. And hit enter. So now you can see we've got breaks here. So let's hit S and create a mask again. And let's see what happens if we get our brush with black, 90%. And let's see. Let's start painting on these interfaces that are a problem. Now I see we've got some other artifacts. We've got the old part of the castle there. We're going to have to deal with that separately. That, I think that's, other than that little piece of castle, yeah, in here a little bit. Let's just cut to the chase and go to 100%. Okay, that looks good. We have this little bit that we'll have to fix. Oh, by the way, while we're here, let's get rid of this thing. So stamp tool, Alt, there's some kind of thing here. I don't know what that is. I was driving Bob nuts. He's such a sensitive soul. So we got to fix that. What we're going to have to do is we're going to have to decide, is the perspective good now? I'm happy with it because we went from there to there. We've got this artifact. That's okay. We can fix that easily. Let's go ahead and take these three layers, the three visible layers, and click on merge layers, merge visible. Okay, there that is. So now we can just zoom in, get our stamp tool again. I wanted a harder edge this time, make it 50%. And I'm going to alt click right in here and just go in and get rid of that little piece. Oh, I'm seeing a little break here too. So let's make it soft edge again. Bring that in, and there's a break right in there. Can you see that? So this is going to get tricky because we have the walls of the castle on either side. So let's make a selection first. So I'm going to hold down the Alt key to give us a nice straight line along that edge of the tower. And I'm going to drag up here. By pre-selecting that, now we can paint and it's not going to go outside of these lines. There's a little bit of brush here. Actually, if anything, it looks like more of a distraction to me. So it's going to go. So I'm going to Alt click there, come down here and mix things up. Still can see a little break in there. And one last thing I'm going to do. I'm going to select in here like this. And I don't want you to see any edges, but everything else otherwise looks fine. So we're going to actually blur that. So let's go to filter, blur, our friend Gaussian blur, and 37.4 pixels. No, just a little bit. Just want to blur the edges a little. Because 37.4 actually went into the sides of the castles, which is why we ended up with that. All right, so we've got that fixed basically. Problems. What are the compositional problems? I was perhaps a little too enamored with the pond and the reflection. I do like the reflection. I couldn't move because if I had taken one step further, I would have been in the pond. Would have been nice if I had squatted down here. But again, that would have put the tree in the way. So what do we need to do? I'm going to make another copy just so we have it. I'm going to Command M. I'm going to select the entire bottom of the image. And you can guess which tool we're going to use. Content aware scale again. So let's hold down the Shift key. Let's bring that up from the bottom. We still get to keep our entire reflection, but now it's not as big, anywhere near as big as it was. And our castle becomes the star. So let's do that. And I never cease to be amazed on this filter. So let's command click on that layer and go to image crop. What else? Well, the perspective has actually made the tower a little skinnier than I like. The tower is actually a little squatter than this, and it's the angle that we're looking at. So we're going to stretch the entire image with Command T, except I need to give myself a little bit more real estate. So let's hit crop, and we're going to actually crop off to the right a bit, but beyond the image. I'm going to do a reverse crop here, which is going to add real estate to it. Now I'm going to do Command T on the entire image, hold down the Shift key, and we're going to spread the entire thing out. And that's more what the tower looks like. So we got to fix that skinnying effect of looking up with a really super wide angle lens. What else do I want to do? I might want to make the sky a little darker, but that again is something more easily accomplished in Lightroom. Let's do a little light painting though. So let's create a light layer. I am going to fill this one with 50% gray because there's going to be a lot of light and dark in here. So there's our 50% gray layer. Let's change it to overlay. So again, let's look at the image. Where do your eyes go? What are the issues? Well, this green over here is a little too bright. Your eye is drawn to here. We also want to create a little more shape in the castle itself. So let's get a brush. We need a little more light in the castle. So let's make that a little bigger. And let's try with 10%. Let's see if that does it. And I think that's actually enough. We'll add some 10%, and I'm following the light areas again. This is a little lighter. We'll make believe this is lighter, and I'm going to put a little more light up on the very top of the castle peak. Oh, the question was, did I do a horizontal shot here? Not from this exact location, but I do have another one I could show you, taken from around to the right, which is a horizontal of the whole thing. All right, so let's get our brush a little smaller. Let's make sure it's on the right layer. There we go. Okay, now that's better. All right, so I'm going around the corner here, getting this lightened up. Let's do the same thing on this piece of the tower because we want to add more dimension to this thing. So we're going to increase the lights and darks. And I'm looking at the places that are already light. Now hit X to put black in the foreground, and we will darken up a little bit more some of the dark parts of the towers. And again, it doesn't look like we're really doing much. And let's see what we've done. Let's turn on and off and look at the difference. Now the castle has got more shade. It's more three-dimensional. So now let's do something down in here. Let's open up the foreground a bit. Let's hit white. Whoops. Let's get a white brush. And 10%'s not doing too much, but it's very gentle. It's actually working. And a little bit more in there. And some of these really deep shadows right in here. And then I also mentioned over here, this is a little too bright. So let's go smaller, put black there, and let's just darken up that. Now, Ireland is, if you've never been here, Ireland is, as the name suggests, an incredibly green place. It deserves its moniker, the Emerald Isle, because it's, when you first get there, you say, oh my God, it really is green. And it really is. But this grass, even though it might have been that green, is distracting me. So I'm going to go to use saturation, and I'm going to bring down the saturation of the image. I'm just going to look here. So let's bring down the saturation so that the grass looks more normal. Okay, so that makes the grass look normal. It dulled everything else. That's okay, because I'm going to close that. Now notice we have a mask here. I'm going to fill that mask with black, Option Delete. which nullifies it. But now if I paint with white in here, it will allow that desaturation to come through just on this grass. So let's go to say 60%. And we're drawing with white, and it just was enough to take some of the heat off of that. Is there anywhere else that's too green? Yeah, maybe over here on this, underneath these shadows, only because I don't want your eyes to go there. So on some of these edges, I'll take away a little bit of that. And I think we're in pretty good shape. So if we go back to where we started, like we can bring our base, there's where we are. That's what we started with. Look at all the distortions. We got rid of the people. We foreshortened the foreground, and we ended up with that, a much better image. I would like to add a little bit more blue to the sky. So let's hit save and send this back into Lightroom. Because again, that's one of the things that Lightroom is just better at. And again, another advantage of Lightroom over Adobe Camera Raw is you can go back and forth. Once you open something in Adobe Camera Raw and send it into Photoshop, it converts it into a TIFF file. And there's not an easy path back into Adobe Camera Raw from that. You'd have to go reopen the file. In Lightroom, it's just a matter of fact how things work. So it is one of the other reasons I like it, because Lightroom's vignette is by far the best. Oh, something I forgot. Darn it. Pardon my language. Merge visible with the Alt key held down. Why? What did I forget? Sharpening. Let's go up to filter or do our smart sharpen on this. Because this is screaming for smart sharpen with all of these little fine details in here. So let's go get a piece of the castle and we can see the edges here. And if I hold it down, that's without sharpening. When I let go, you see the sharpening kick in. Can you see how much better defined the rock is? Does that pass through on zoom? Yeah, so that's great. So let's hit OK on that. Take advantage of the sharpening that Photoshop can do. It's much more controlled and controllable than anything Lightroom can do. That's a little more advanced option. Oh yeah, even on my monitor, I can see that looks awesome. So can you see how clear all the little fine details are? It just looks great. Okay, so now let's hit save. Send that back into Lightroom. You can see it saving down here in the bottom left. And we will open this thing in Lightroom. Yeah, so if anybody else is interested, we are going to Ireland on August 1st. Actually, I think most people are going to go a day or so early, so you get a chance to do the time change thing. Yes, there's our image. Okay. All right, so here's the image we brought in. We'll do our Lightroom fine tunings. Again, I always do my vignette in Lightroom, because if I decide to change my crop to fit in a frame, it moves with it. That's the thing I like about it. What was I after? Oh, the sky. Let's do select the sky. We're going to add a little dehaze to add a little intensity to it. Bring out the clouds a little more. And I'm also going to bring down this area. In fact, as I do that, I see, oh, look, there's a little break right there that showed up because we dehazed. I want to darken this side of the sky. So I'm going to do an intersect with a linear gradient from over here. So I'm going to drag this across this way so that I can darken the sky over here. Let's add a little blue, bring the exposure down, add some saturation. Not completely thrilled with the color of the blue, but you know where we're going to fix that. It's actually too green, needs a little red. But I caused a problem. You see it? Can you see it right here? See the break? The best solution would be to take this back into Photoshop. Let's see if we can use the spot removal tool to fix that. So let's get ourselves a big spot removal. Let's see what happens if we draw along that border. That worked. Okay. So we'll do that and just drag down here. Oh, that was all it needed. Okay. Up, there's a little bit more here. You can see the straight line. And even though we couldn't see it when we're in Photoshop, when we increased the contrast of this thing, it started showing up. That happens with spots all the time too. Almost done. You guys know I'm big on doing a light thing to my subject. And I like doing that with the radial filter. So Shift M. And I'm going to angle this to create a little sense of motion, having your leading line up to your subject at an angle adds a little bit of subliminal visual motion to the shot. Let's bring that up a little bit. And I think we're done. Let's hit done. So when you think that we started with this and we turned this image into that, it's a remarkable transformation. And you've seen how it's done. It's one thing to know the tools. There's a lot of people that teach the tools, but it's another thing to understand the workflow and the composition and the thought process to turn the thing into a better photograph. And that's been my focus for the past 5 or 6 years or so. I'm really enjoying what's happening. As I look at this, I'd probably darken up here a little bit more, but enough is enough because we're running out of time. And there's one more I got to show you. This image was a little kind of a funny story. Let me do a virtual copy of it. This is Sankaty Light. This is on Nantucket off the coast of Cape Cod. And I took this picture as I was trying to create some examples of what not to do. And I wanted to show how having your subject dead center is awful. And my friend Rick Salmon, he does a talk, and one of his little Salmonisms is dead center is deadly. And in many times that is the case. However, the more I looked at this, the fact that it's dead center and the fact that the image is almost bisected right across the middle, if we just crop a little bit, there was something graphical with this that was starting to happen that made me think, wait a second, I think there's an interesting photograph here. So let's start with our basics here. What are the problems? Well, obviously it's really flat. It was a misty day. Strangely enough, not soon after this, the sun did come out. Let's add some clarity. Let's add a bunch of clarity. Let's add some dehaze. I'm doing that first because I want to see where the rest of the things take me. Now let's bring up the exposure. And it needs saturation. It's lost all its color. And we'll add some vibrance as well, maybe a little contrast. And actually, as I'm looking at it, I'm thinking the foreground's maybe a little too dark, but now I'm okay with it for what we're doing right now. I think I want this black a little darker. So let's get a brush, make a nice big brush, and turn on auto mask. Let's undo that. And let's get the base, the top, and the walkways. All right, let's darken those up a little bit and add a little black. So I want this to be graphical. All right, so, okay, it still doesn't work, but let's do a crop. Where is the composition here? Well, we got to make the bottom so that it is shorter than the lighthouse itself, but leave enough to have a pedestal underneath it. And then we'll do the same thing for the top. We're going to bring this down. Do we need this full thing left to right? Not sure yet, but the lighthouse is perfectly straight. It's dead center. It's just screaming for a sky. Now, this is a bear of a sky to replace because not only is there grass coming up into the sky, but in some cases, it's even kind of blowing in the wind a bit. So you can see it's not completely in focus. But I was not too far from here. Actually, when I was driving home later this day, I came across this sky late in the afternoon. I see we have a highlight warning, which we don't care about. And I loved the one gull kind of flying by. And I thought, I'm going to combine these two. So I'm going to open both of these with them both chosen. You can, if I hit G, you can see them. There's the two images. And go to Photo, Edit In, Open as Layers in Photoshop. All right, so let's head over to Photoshop. You can see they're opening there. Okay. Now, we could try to do this all by our lonesomes, but Photoshop does have a sky replacement tool. The problem is if you use Photoshop skies, you're going to start to have images that have the same skies as everybody else has, because there's not that many in there. And there's millions of people using Photoshop. So we can see our sky is much bigger than the image. Let's just hide it for a second. So what you can do in the Photoshop sky tool, sky replacement tool, is you can add your own skies in. It's not particularly friendly, however, because you can only upload JPEGs into it, and you can only do them one at a time. I had like 50 skies I was going to load in, and it took the first one. So that's something that needs to be fixed. But it's under, right here, under Edit, Sky Replacement. So let's click on that and see what happens. All right, so the first thing it does, it goes to the last sky you used, which you can see up here, which is one of the canned Photoshop skies. Well, and there's no way to stop it at this point. You got to let it do its thing, because what it's doing is it's finding where the sky is, and it's figuring out appropriate masks to use in the image. So let's see how good a job it does with this sky. It could be interesting sky. It's not the one I want, but let's see what it comes up with. Okay, so there's the sky it just chose. Not terrible, but that's not the sky I want. I want my sky. But it did do a remarkable job around the grass. So if trying to select a sky from something like this is, you think is too much, well, look, there's an answer. Now I could just hit OK, but if you click on here, you see blue, you see all the skies that they provide you. But you also, if you scroll down, you'll see Joe's skies. And here's the sky. I think that's the sky with my bird in it. Or is it this one? I think it's this one. Yeah, there it is. And you can then, you can then move it. Where'd my bird go? Maybe it was the one above. Oh, my bird's not here. All right, hold on. I want my bird. Maybe it was this one. So I can then, again, as I mentioned, there's my bird. Okay, that's what I wanted. So I'm going to put the bird off to the one side and have that kind of light beam right through. And I like it. So I'm going to hit OK. What Photoshop then does is it creates all these masks for you. So let's go ahead and crop back. I'm going to hit Command on that, and we get to see the crop. So image crop. All right, so let's see what it is we want to do with this thing. So if we hide these other layers, you can see there's one of the two masks. It creates both a sky mask and it creates a blending mask, which is this kind of soft gray thing you can see right here. So the combination of the two of them and the fading is what it's allowing it to do this. The cool thing is, while you're here, if you decide you want to put in one of your own skies, you can click on this actual sky layer right here and replace it with your own. So I have this one right here. I'll just, let me just make this live. I'll hide everything else. So it's the same sky, but let's just make believe it's not. I'll hit select all and copy. All right, so I copied that. I have a copy of it on here. So if I then come here, create a new layer and paste Command V, it puts the sky in there, which isn't particularly helpful, you wouldn't think, but I can then take the mask from this layer, drag it up to there, and there's the sky that we just added. So if you're finding masking to be difficult on something like this, by all means, let Photoshop do it, and then you can just put your own sky in this way. The beauty of doing it this way is it doesn't have to be a JPEG. It can just be one of your Photoshop files. But in this case, Lightroom did a fine job with this. So what are the problems? What does it need? It needs some more drama. And this is something that I think is really screaming for a black and white layer. Let's try that. Let's go to a black and white image adjustment layer here. And it does its default. If you click on where it says default, let's see what a red filter would do to that. Nope, that doesn't work. What do we need? Let's see, yellow. Let's bring the yellows down. If you're not sure what it needs, but I know I want the sky darker, I can click on this finger here. God, do you guys remember laughing? Anybody remember the flying fickle finger of fate? Doesn't that look like it? Click in the sky here and I can drag left and right and it will tell you what colors are underneath there. So if I want to bring that down, I can do that way. And I think that's we can also click on the red. Look at that. I can make just the red darker, picks up the red elements of the foreground. And that's good, but I didn't do this because I wanted a black and white. I wanted a tone mask because I'm now going to take this black and white thing and change the blending mode to luminosity. And if I turn this on and off, you can see what it's done is it's applied those darkenings. Now it's too saturated for me, the entire image. So let's go to use saturation. Let's bring the saturation way down. And I want it down there, but I don't want the lighthouse to lose its color. So notice when you do, again, it's an adjustment layer. It gives us a mask. I'm going to get a brush and put black in the foreground because we have a white mask. So if I want to counter it, I need to use black. And I'm going to go to 100% and bring back my lighthouse color. All right, now maybe I want to make it more dramatic. How else can we do that? Well, two things. One, the lights are too light, so we need to use a levels adjustment to fix that. Could also do it with curves, but again, I'm going to bring down the output levels and I'm going to bring up the midtones to flatten it out a little bit. And now let's make a curves adjustment. Let's see what a curve will do for us. So curves present you with this straight line thing over top of the histogram. If you want to make something more contrasty, you can let the software do it. And you can use the finger thing here. I can click on there and drag up and down. Or I can add points. I'm going to add it up and down and in the middle. I'm going to drag the lower one down, bring the upper one up a bit, which will add contrast to the image. And I'll increase the midtones as well. And I think we're done with that part. Now the sky has gotten a little bit too blue for my liking. And again, this is one of those times where now this thing is ready to go back into Lightroom. So we've got all these layers here. We don't need, I don't need these anymore. I'm just going to flatten the thing. I'm going to flatten the entire image and I'm going to save it to send this back into Lightroom because I want to add some more drama to the sky, but I want to take the color out. So we're going to do a sky selection, pull out some saturation, add some dehaze, and bring down the brightness a little bit. All right, so here's our image. Let's go to select sky. I can see it having trouble with this. I can understand because there's so many things going on here. All right, so let's bring down the whites to bring down those highlights there. Let's bring out the saturation somewhat. We're going to leave it a little bit blue, but not quite as anywhere near as much as it was. And let's add some dehaze. There we go. That's what I was after. Much better. And now the foreground. Let's do that. And I think we can do this just as easily with a brush. So let's just cut to the chase and get a brush, which is K. Give ourselves a nice big brush. Auto mask is on, so we can just drag across this thing and it will pick up everything we need. So what do I want to do with this? So maybe the exposure up a little bit. Let's take out some saturation. I think I want it a little more yellow. Maybe not. Now I want it desaturated because I want this to be more saturated. I want a little more red in my lighthouse. So one more brush. Auto mask is on again. So let's choose the red in here. And let's increase the saturation of our red. It's a little orangey to me, which means it needs more blue. So let's do that. And let's bring up the exposure a little bit. And a vignette. And we ended up with really kind of a cool image. So let's see where we ended up. It's just kind of an interesting feeling for an image that I originally took, intending it to be an example of what not to do. Now, for me personally, one thing I would further do, when we were in Photoshop, this foreground was kind of impossible to mask because there was some blurriness because the grass was blowing. I would have gone into the mask and done a little bit of a gradient in here to bring that down. What? We need to turn the light on in the lighthouse, says Bob. Fine. We're going to turn the light on in the lighthouse. Leave it to Bob to come up with that. But just before we leave here and go back into Photoshop, just to remind you that that's what we started with. That's where we ended up. But Bob's not happy because Bob wants a light. Fine. We got to keep Bob happy. All right, so we'll do edit copy with our Lightroom adjustments. And we're going to add ourselves a cool little light in here. It's a little imprecise, the ability to do this in Photoshop, but there is a cool tool that will allow us to do that. We need to do it on another layer. All right, so Command J. All right, so I have another layer, and the tool is Filter, Render, Lens Flare. And then you need to tell it what kind of lens flare it is. And there'll be a little menu that comes up, and you can see 50 to 300, 35, 105, movie prime, which gives you all the flares. Let's see which of these appeals to you. That's not sunny enough to create that. I'm thinking more a 105 prime with the brightness turned down a bit will be appropriate. And we can, since it's on a layer, we can further bring it down. But now what you have to do is in this small window, because you can't make it bigger, you've got to click on where the light is and figure out, okay, where is the light in there? Let's see if that's it. And hit OK and let Photoshop render it and see how close it is to being in the right place. And you can see, obviously, it's way too bright. Let's try a different one. We need something smaller. So we'll have to make it a little smaller, gentler one. Yeah, I think this is the right one, but we just need to really turn the brightness down. Let's see if that works. It's still probably going to be overly bright. Actually, that's kind of cool. Yeah, we did pick up some lens flare stuff, which, you know what? This is a supernatural kind of thing. Let's go with it. I like it. Let's hit save. Diane just mentioned, could I mask out those light flares? Yes. If I brought up a mask, if you don't like the light flares, since it's an exact copy of what's underneath, add the mask. They're disturbing Diane's calm. Okay. We don't want that to happen. So I hit 0 for my brush and I just paint there. And again, since it's on its own layer, there we go. Now we just, oh, it picked up a little, her calm is restored. I'm sure if you're not all relieved, I am. All right, so let's save that. And actually, this actually is, I have to admit, Bob, I've done this image before when I've been playing with it. I never did adding the light. I've done on other lighthouse images. It was the first time I've done it with this image. And actually, when we do that, you're going to make me change one other thing. Because of the light we added, we need the vignette differently. So I'm going to bring the vignette all the way down. And I'm going to bring the midpoint in from the edges, but I don't want it quite so round. I want it more to the edge. I think something like that. I'm going to feather it out some more and then back it off to, 20 or so, maybe something like that. In fact, while I'm at it, you're making me, you got me doing all kinds of stuff here now. I'm going to do a gradient down, bring the exposure down on the top of the sky. Okay. And we're done. Actually, Bob, thank you. That was actually a good idea and it looks pretty cool. And I got it. You got 5 more minutes? Yeah, I want to show you. So this is more of a fun one. This is along with the banana one. All right. So I was in this used to be my subway stop when I worked in the city. And I had a camera, obviously. Let me see if I can see what camera it is. Well, that was back in the JPEG days. So this is 2003. So I think this would have been, it was either a Fuji S2 or S1 or a Nikon D1X, one of those. Those are the two cameras I was shooting with. And this guy showed up afterwards walking by. And as soon as I saw him, I thought, oh, wait, I see something here. He just kind of looks, he's a little bit rumpled. He's just, I think he's heading home. So I'm going to select these two images and go to photo, edit in, open as layers. Because as soon as I saw the guy, I just had an idea for a composite with this, and kind of thinking of, just the guy, kind of the way he seems slumped over. I may be reading into him, but slumped over a little bit, just kind of thinking another set. The Japanese call them salaryman, another guy just heading home for the day, kind of invisible to the rest of the world. And I thought, well, there he is. And I'd like to have him, but be somewhat transparent. The problem is I was shooting this handheld, even though it's from the same spot. So the images don't line up. But what you can do is come up to layers, align. Oh, I don't actually, you know what? There's an automatic one. I forget where that's hidden. Hold on. Where's align layers? Align layers. Here we go. Auto align layers. And just click on auto. And what Photoshop will do is find out everything that needs to happen. Now, if I turn these on and off, they're aligned. And then you just simply take the top one, bring down the opacity, and I have this ghostly guy invisible to the rest of the world. Let's do a crop for it. That's appropriate. And there he is. There's our semi-invisible dude walking along at the end of the day. So that was what I thought when I saw this guy. So I knew I had to go home and do this. And this was where when I originally did this, I had to align it manually, because Photoshop didn't have this capability in 2003, which, as long as we're at it, I will show you another blending mode example. So you can actually see what the blending mode was for. So imagine I'm going to move this. I'm going to move this layer, like something like that. Remember I think I mentioned swapping heads using difference. Well, if I go to difference here, and I need to make it 100% so we can see, this happens. And if I drag the one layer and move it until everything turns black, because that means it's lined up. You've noticed up here, the 23 disappears. When you get these lined up perfectly, everything disappears. And then I can put it back to normal and then bring the opacity down. And that was how you lined up stuff in the past. You had to use the difference blending mode, and that's what allowed you to see when everything was exactly in the right place, because it all turned black. So that's the use for difference. If you don't have auto align, or you just want to swap a head in a group shot, that's how you do it, because you just put the eyes over so that they're over the top of the eyes in the previous photograph, and they line up perfectly. And since I'm not going to do it, I had mentioned, somebody asked about the castle from the side. So there's the Blarney Castle from the other side. The other fun thing I was playing around with compositing was I decided what happened if there was a pond with very rough water in front of it. So I did that. Ladies and gentlemen, that's it for tonight. We didn't do a lot of different images, but I think we covered a lot of ground as to some of the more advanced features of Photoshop, with the ability to do the warping and the blending and just changing the composition and compositing. On the newsletter, I will report back from Zion and Bryce and Snow Canyon and wherever else I end up. I'll give my first report back to you next week.